You're sleeping less than 5 hours a night, moving through your days in a fog, and somehow getting out of bed feels easier now than it did when you were getting 8 hours. That doesn't make sense, does it? Your body should be screaming for rest, pulling you back under the covers, begging you to stay horizontal just a little longer. But instead, you pop up almost automatically, like a machine that's forgotten it needs fuel. There's no grogginess, no heavy limbs, no mental negotiation with yourself about hitting snooze one more time. You just wake up and go running on empty, and it feels almost effortless. But here's what nobody tells you. That ease you're feeling isn't strength. It's not resilience or discipline or some superhuman ability to function without sleep. It's your nervous system in survival mode, pumping adrenaline and cortisol through your veins because your body thinks it's under threat. When you're sleep deprived, your brain starts operating like you're in danger, like you need to be alert and ready to run at any moment. So yeah, getting out of bed feels easier, but only because your body has stopped trusting that it's safe to rest. You're not thriving, you're just too wired to feel how exhausted you really are. And that's just one of the strange, unsettling truths about human behavior that no one ever taught you. The kind of thing that once you see it, you can't unsee it. The kind of thing that makes you realize how much of what we do, how we move through the world, how we connect or disconnect from others, is driven by forces we don't even understand. There are patterns in human behavior that run so deep, so quietly beneath the surface, that most of us live our entire lives never questioning them. We think we're choosing our actions, our reactions, our relationships, but so much of it is automatic, wired into us by evolution, by trauma, by the silent language of our nervous systems trying to keep us safe. And once you start to see these patterns, once you understand the psychology behind why people do what they do, why you do what you do, everything starts to make sense in a way it never did before. The world becomes less confusing, less personal, less like everyone is just randomly hurting you or ignoring you or misunderstanding you. You start to see the invisible forces at play, the reasons behind the behavior, and suddenly you have a map where before you only had chaos. Let's talk about how people open up, because this is something almost everyone gets wrong. You meet someone, you want to connect, you want them to trust you, to share their real thoughts, their real feelings, the stuff they don't say to just anyone. So what do? You ask them questions. You try to create a comfortable environment. You tell them it's safe to be vulnerable with you. And maybe it works, but more often it doesn't. They stay guarded, surface level, and you walk away feeling like you failed somehow. Like you weren't interesting enough or trustworthy enough to earn their openness. But here's what actually works, and it's so counterintuitive that most people never think to try it. If you want someone to open up to you, you open up to them first. You share something real, something a little vulnerable, something that shows you're willing to go beneath the surface. Not your deepest trauma, not your darkest secret, but something honest and human that signals you're not interested in playing the game of superficial small talk. Because vulnerability is contagious. When you show someone that you're willing to be real, their nervous system registers that as safety, as permission to let their guard down too. It's not about asking the right questions. It's about creating the emotional space where authenticity feels possible. People don't open up because you seem nice. They open up because you go first. And here's another one that messes with people's heads. When you're arguing with someone, when you're in conflict, when there's tension in the air and you're trying to make your point, the way you physically position your body changes everything. If you sit down during a tense conversation, especially if your opponent, the person you're in conflict with, is standing, you are unconsciously putting yourself in a position of submission. Standing makes you feel more powerful, more in control, more able to hold your ground. Sitting makes you feel smaller, more vulnerable, more likely to fold under pressure. This isn't some spiritual woo-woo thing. This is how your nervous system works. When you stand, your body is in a more active, assertive state. Your heart rate changes, your breathing changes, your sense of physical presence in the space changes. You take up more room. You feel more solid. And that feeling translates into how confidently you speak, how firmly you hold your boundaries, how much you're willing to push back. So if someone is standing over you, if they're pacing while you're sitting, if they're using their physical height to dominate the conversation, you're already at a disadvantage before a single word is spoken. And the wild part is, most people do this instinctively, without even realizing it. They stand when they want power. They tower over you when they want you to back down. And if you're sitting there thinking the content of your argument is all that matters, you're already losing the psychological battle. Let me tell you about something else that happens constantly but no one ever talks about. When you hand someone an object, when you pass them a cup of coffee or a piece of paper or a book, the way you do it, the physical gesture of giving or receiving, communicates more than you think. If you hand something to someone casually, without looking at them, without pausing, without creating a moment of connection, you're sending the message that the exchange doesn't matter, that they don't matter, that this is transactional and nothing more. But if you hand something to someone and you make eye contact, if you pause for just a second, if you pass the object with a slight sense of intention, suddenly it feels different. It feels like you see them, like they exist to you as more than just a person in the way. This is why people who work in service industries, who hand things to strangers all day, can feel so invisible. Because most people take without looking, without acknowledging, without creating even a micro moment of human recognition. And on the flip side, when you receive something from someone, when you take something from their hands, you have the same opportunity. You can take it while scrolling on your phone, or you can take it while meeting their eyes, while saying thank you, while briefly acknowledging that a human being just did something for you. It sounds small, it sounds insignificant, but these tiny moments of recognition or lack thereof add up. They shape how people feel around you, whether they feel seen or invisible, whether they feel valued or like they're just part of the scenery. Now let's get into something that will change how you see conversations forever. If someone is staring at you, if their eyes are locked on you in a way that feels intense or uncomfortable, or just wrong somehow, don't stare back at their eyes. Look at their shoes. Look at their feet. I know that sounds bizarre. I know it sounds like the kind of advice that makes no sense on the surface, but here's why it works. When someone is staring at you with intensity, whether it's aggression or dominance or some kind of power play, they're trying to engage you in a visual standoff. They want you to meet their gaze, to lock eyes, to enter into a nonverbal battle of who's going to look away first. And if you engage in that, if you stare back, you're playing their game, and your nervous system is going to activate, your heart rate is going to spike, you're going to feel that adrenaline surge that comes with confrontation. But if you look at their shoes, if you drop your gaze down to something completely neutral and non-threatening, you remove yourself from the power dynamic entirely. You're not submitting by looking down at the ground in front of you, which would signal defeat. You're also not challenging them by staring back. You're just opting out of the whole interaction, and that neutrality, that refusal to engage, is incredibly disarming. It confuses their nervous system because they were expecting a reaction, either fear or aggression, and instead you're giving them nothing. You're staying calm, staying grounded, and by looking at something as mundane as their shoes, you're signaling that you're not interested in the confrontation they're trying to create. It's a psychological move that keeps you safe and centered while completely diffusing the tension. And here's something about sleep deprivation that goes way beyond just feeling tired. When you're not getting enough sleep, when you're running on 4 or 5 hours a night instead of the 7 or 8 your body actually needs, your brain starts to do something really disturbing. It starts to shut down the parts of you that process emotions, that regulate your mood, that allow you to empathize with other people. The prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that handles rational thought and emotional regulation, goes offline when you're exhausted. What stays online? The amygdala, the primitive, reactive part of your brain that's all about fear and survival and fight or flight. So when you're sleep deprived, you're not just tired, you're literally a different version of yourself. You're more reactive, more irritable, more likely to snap at people you love, more likely to interpret neutral situations as threatening, more likely to make impulsive decisions that you'll regret later. You feel like you're holding it together, like you're functioning fine, but you're actually operating from your most primitive, least evolved brain state. And the worst part is, you don't even realize it's happening. You just think you're stressed, or that people are being annoying, or that life is harder than it used to be. You don't connect the dots back to the fact that you haven't had a decent night's sleep in weeks, or months, or years. And your relationships suffer, your work suffers, your mental health suffers, all because your brain is trying to survive on a fraction of the rest it needs. There's something else about sleep that most people don't understand, and it's why so many of us are walking around in a chronic state of exhaustion without even knowing it. Sleep isn't just about the number of hours, it's about the quality, the depth, the ability to actually cycle through the stages your brain needs to repair itself. And when you're stressed, when you're anxious, when your nervous system is stuck in hypervigilance, you can be in bed for 8 hours and still wake up feeling like you didn't sleep at all. Because your body never fully relaxed, never felt safe enough to drop into the deep, restorative stages of sleep where healing actually happens. You're lying there with your eyes closed, but your brain is still scanning for danger, still processing stress, still running background programs that keep you in a low-level state of alertness. This is why people with trauma often struggle with sleep, why people with anxiety wake up tired no matter how long they were in bed, why simply spending more time horizontal doesn't fix the exhaustion. Your body doesn't trust that it's safe to rest, so it doesn't. And until you address the nervous system dysregulation, until you teach your body that it's okay to let go, that nothing bad is going to happen if you fully relax, no amount of melatonin or sleep hygiene or perfect bedroom conditions is going to give you the rest you're desperate for. Now I need to pause here for a moment, because if you're listening to this and feeling like I'm describing your life, like I'm somehow narrating the exact patterns you've been living but never had words for, I want you to do something. I want you to leave a comment down below, something simple, something honest, something that captures what you're feeling right now. Maybe it's, I haven't slept well in years, or I always sit during arguments, or I never make eye contact when I give things to people. Whatever it is, just put it out there. Because when you name these patterns, when you acknowledge them, you're taking the first step toward changing them. And here's the thing, when you comment, you're not just helping yourself process this, you're helping everyone else who reads it feel less alone. Because I read every single comment, and I see how many people are living the same struggles, carrying the same pain, thinking they're the only ones who feel this way. So go ahead, leave your comment, and know that by sharing, you're creating connection, you're building community, you're reminding someone else that they're not crazy for feeling what they feel. Now let's keep going. There's a phenomenon that happens in relationships, in friendships, in any kind of connection between people. And it's one of the most painful patterns to recognize, because once you see it, you realize how often it's been happening your whole life. When someone doesn't ask you questions about yourself, when conversations are always about them, when you finish talking and they immediately pivot back to their own story without acknowledging what you just shared, it's not because they're bad people or because you're boring. It's because they're not actually present with you. Their nervous system is so caught up in their own experience, their own needs, their own anxiety about being seen and heard, that there's no space left to actually receive you. They're not listening to understand, they're listening to respond. Or worse, they're not really listening at all. They're just waiting for their turn to talk. And you can feel it, can't you? You can feel the difference between someone who's actually with you, who's curious about you, who makes space for your experience, and someone who's just performing connection while staying completely self-focused. The people who never ask about your life, who never follow up on things you've told them, who never seem curious about what's happening in your world, those people are so trapped in their own survival mode that they genuinely can't see you. And it's not your job to make them see you. It's not your job to perform or be more interesting or try harder to capture their attention. It's your job to recognize that this isn't real connection, and to stop giving your energy to people who can't receive it. Here's something that happens in conflict that most people never notice. When you're arguing with someone and they start bringing up past issues, things that have nothing to do with what you're currently talking about, things that happened weeks or months or years ago, they're not actually trying to resolve anything. They're trying to overwhelm you. They're trying to create so much emotional chaos that you can't stay focused on the actual issue at hand, that you get lost in defending yourself against old accusations, that you forget what you were even upset about in the first place. This is a manipulation tactic, sometimes conscious but often unconscious, that people use when they don't want to take responsibility for what's happening right now. Instead of dealing with the present hurt, instead of acknowledging their role in the current problem, they throw everything else into the ring, and suddenly you're drowning in a sea of unrelated grievances, and the real issue never gets addressed. If you notice this pattern, if you find yourself constantly defending your past while the present moment goes unresolved, you need to name it. You need to say, "We're not talking about that right now, we're talking about this," and refuse to engage with the derailment. Because every time you let the conversation get hijacked by old wounds, you're training the other person that they can avoid accountability by just bringing up more stuff. You're teaching them that deflection works. Let's talk about something that happens with compliments, because this is subtle but it matters more than you think. When someone compliments you and you immediately deflect it, When you say, "Oh, it's nothing," or "I just got lucky," or "this old thing," you're not being humble, you're rejecting the gift they're trying to give you. Because a compliment isn't just about the words. It's about someone seeing you, noticing something about you, and choosing to express appreciation. And when you deflect it, when you minimize it, when you can't just say, "Thank you," and let it land, you're telling them that their perception doesn't matter, that what they see in you isn't real or valid. Over time, this trains people to stop complimenting you, to stop expressing appreciation, because why would they keep offering something you won't receive? And on a deeper level, your inability to accept compliments is revealing something about your relationship with yourself, about how little you believe you deserve to be seen, to be appreciated, to take up space in a positive way. Every time you deflect a compliment, you're reinforcing the belief that you're not enough, that anything good about you is accidental or temporary, or not really yours to claim. And that belief is slowly eroding your self-worth, one deflection at a time. Here's something about silence that will change how you navigate conversations. When there's a pause, when someone stops talking and there's a moment of quiet, most people rush to fill it. They feel uncomfortable, awkward, like something is wrong, and they need to fix it by saying anything, even if it's meaningless. But silence is where the real communication happens. Silence is where people process what's been said, where they decide whether to go deeper or stay surface, where the truth has space to emerge if you can just resist the urge to fill every second with words. The most powerful thing you can do in a conversation is to get comfortable with silence, to let it exist without trying to rescue the other person from it, to trust that if they have more to say, they'll say it. Because when you rush to fill the silence, you're taking away their opportunity to go deeper. You're interrupting the internal process they're going through. You're signaling that you're more interested in avoiding discomfort than in actually hearing them. The people who are best at connecting, at making others feel truly heard, are the people who can sit in silence without panicking, who can give someone 10 seconds or 20 seconds or a full minute to gather their thoughts, to feel their feelings, to find the words that actually matter. If you want to build real intimacy, if you want people to open up to you in ways they don't with others, learn to be okay with silence. Learn to see it not as awkward emptiness, but as sacred space where truth can finally breathe. There's a pattern in how people talk about their problems that reveals everything about whether they actually want to change. Listen to the language someone uses when they're describing a struggle, when they're telling you about something hard in their life. Do they say, "This keeps happening to me?" Or do they say, "I keep doing this"? Do they talk about their problems like they're victims of circumstance, like life is just randomly difficult and they have no agency? Or do they talk about their role, their patterns, the ways they might be contributing to the cycle? Because the person who says bad things always happen to me is stuck in a victim mindset, and until they shift that, nothing will change. They'll keep attracting the same situations, the same types of people, the same problems, because they're not taking any ownership of their part in creating or perpetuating the pattern. But the person who says, "I notice I keep choosing people who aren't available," or "I realize I have a habit of avoiding conflict until it explodes," that person is already on the path to change, because they're seeing themselves as an active participant in their life, not just a passive recipient of random events. And this isn't about blame. It's not about making people feel bad for their struggles. It's about recognizing that you can't change what you can't see, and if all you see is external circumstances, then you're powerless. But if you can see your patterns, your choices, your responses, suddenly you have leverage. Suddenly you can do something different. Let me tell you something about anxiety that most people experience but never connect the dots on. When you're anxious, when your nervous system is activated, and you're feeling that racing heart, that tightness in your chest, that sense of impending doom, your brain starts scanning your environment for threats. It's trying to figure out why you feel this way, trying to identify the danger so it can respond appropriately. But here's the problem. Most of the time, the anxiety isn't coming from anything in your present environment. It's coming from old trauma, from unprocessed stress, from a nervous system that's been running hot for so long, it doesn't know how to turn off. But your brain doesn't know that. Your brain thinks there must be a reason for this feeling, so it starts creating stories, finding problems, fixating on things that might not even be real threats just to make sense of the sensation in your body. This is why anxiety can feel so irrational. Why you can know logically that everything is fine but still feel terrified. Why you can be in a safe situation and convince yourself that something bad is about to happen. Your body is sending danger signals, and your brain is desperately trying to make meaning out of them, even if it has to invent the meaning. And until you understand this disconnect, until you learn to recognize that the feeling isn't always about what's happening right now, you'll keep believing the stories your anxious brain creates, and those stories will keep you trapped. Now here's something about the way we learn behavior that explains so much of why we do what we do. Everything you saw modeled in childhood, every pattern you witnessed in your home, every way your parents or caregivers interacted with each other and with you, all of that got wired into your nervous system as normal. Even if it was dysfunctional, even if it was painful, even if it hurt you, if it was consistent, if it was what you knew, then your brain filed it under, "This is how relationships work," or "This is how people treat each other," or "This is what love looks like." And now, as an adult, even though you consciously know better, even though you can intellectually recognize that what you experienced wasn't healthy, your nervous system still defaults to those patterns because they're familiar. Familiar feels safe, even when familiar is actually harmful. This is why people repeat generational trauma, why you might find yourself in relationships that mirror your parents' dynamic, why you respond to stress the same way you saw modeled growing up, even when you swore you'd never be like that. It's not because you're weak or broken or destined to repeat the past. It's because your nervous system learned those patterns so early and so deeply that they became automatic. And changing them requires more than just awareness. It requires actively rewiring, consciously choosing different responses over and over until the new pattern becomes as automatic as the old one. It requires patience with yourself, compassion for how hard it is to unlearn what was taught through experience, and the willingness to keep trying even when you slip back into old ways. There's something that happens when you're healing, when you're doing the work of changing your patterns and breaking cycles and becoming a different version of yourself, and nobody warns you about this part. The people in your life who are used to the old you, who benefited from your people-pleasing or your silence or your willingness to shrink, they're going to resist your growth. Not always in obvious ways, not always with open hostility, but through subtle comments, through disappointment when you set boundaries, through confusion when you stop playing the role you always played. They'll say things like, "You've changed," as if it's an accusation, as if staying the same broken version of yourself would be better. They'll make you feel guilty for prioritizing your healing, for saying no, for not being endlessly available to manage their emotions or meet their needs. And this is the loneliest part of growth, realizing that not everyone who loved the old you will be able to love the new you, because the new you requires them to relate differently, to show up differently, to stop relying on your dysfunction to maintain the relationship. Some people will rise to meet you, will adjust and grow alongside you, will celebrate your healing even when it makes them uncomfortable. But some people won't. And you'll have to decide if you're willing to shrink back down to fit into relationships that can't hold the fullness of who you're becoming, or if you're brave enough to let those relationships fall away. And that's a grief, a real and valid grief, but it's also the price of freedom. Here's something about apologies that most people get completely wrong. When someone hurts you and they apologize, pay attention to what they actually say. Are they apologizing for the action or for your reaction? Are they saying, "I'm sorry I did that," or are they saying, "I'm sorry you feel that way"? Because those are not the same thing. "I'm sorry you feel that way" is not an apology, it's a dismissal. It's putting the responsibility on you for having feelings about what they did, instead of taking responsibility for doing the thing in the first place. It's a way of appearing to apologize while actually reinforcing that they don't think they did anything wrong, that the problem is your sensitivity, not their behavior. A real apology acknowledges the specific action, takes full responsibility without justification, and expresses understanding of the impact. It sounds like, "I'm sorry I said that, it was hurtful and I shouldn't have done it." Not, "I'm sorry if you were hurt by what I said." Do you hear the difference? One takes ownership, the other deflects. And if you're someone who's been conditioned to accept fake apologies, to be grateful for even the smallest acknowledgement of wrongdoing, you need to start holding people to a higher standard. You deserve real accountability, not performative contrition that changes nothing. Let me tell you something about the way trauma affects your perception of time. When you're triggered, when something in your present activates an old wound, your nervous system doesn't just react to what's happening now, It collapses past and present into one overwhelming experience. Suddenly, you're not just dealing with the current situation, you're feeling everything you felt when the original hurt happened. You're that age again, that powerless again, that terrified again. This is why reactions to seemingly small things can feel so huge, so disproportionate. It's not that you're overreacting to what just happened. It's that your nervous system is responding to the accumulated weight of every time you've felt this way, every time you've been hurt in this particular way, and it all comes crashing down at once. Your partner forgets to call, and suddenly you're convinced they don't care. They're leaving. They never loved you, because your nervous system is replaying every abandonment you've ever experienced. Your boss gives you feedback, and suddenly you're worthless, incompetent, a failure, because your nervous system is reliving every time you were criticized or shamed or made to feel like you weren't enough. Until you understand this, until you learn to recognize when you're in a time collapse, when you're reacting to the past in the present, you'll keep having these overwhelming emotional responses and not knowing why. And you'll keep believing the stories your triggered nervous system is telling you about what's happening right now. And if you've made it this far in this video, if you're still here with me, still feeling every word land somewhere deep in your chest, I want you to know something. This channel exists because I believe these conversations matter. Because I believe that understanding yourself, understanding why you do what you do, why you feel what you feel, is the most radical act of self-love you can engage in. Every week I put out content that goes deep, that doesn't just skim the surface, but dives into the messy, complicated truth of what it means to be human, to heal, to grow. And if you want to keep going on this journey with me, if you want more of these conversations that help you see yourself more clearly, I'd love for you to subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell. Not because I need the numbers, but because I genuinely believe that the more people who have access to this kind of understanding, the more people who learn to see their patterns and break their cycles, the better we all are. This isn't just about self-help. It's about building a community of people who are committed to healing, who are willing to look at the hard stuff, who understand that growth is messy and nonlinear and absolutely worth it. So if that resonates with you, hit subscribe, join us, and let's keep doing this work together. Now let's talk about something that happens in group settings, in social situations, in any environment where multiple people are interacting. There's a phenomenon where the person who talks the most, who dominates the conversation, who takes up the most space, is often seen as the most confident, the most important, the leader. But here's what's actually happening. That person is usually the most insecure. They're filling every silence because they can't tolerate not being the center of attention. They're talking over others because they're terrified of being forgotten or overlooked. They're performing confidence while actually being desperate for validation. The people who are truly secure, truly grounded, they're comfortable with silence. They don't need to dominate every conversation. They can listen. They can make space for others. They can let someone else shine without feeling threatened. So if you're someone who tends to be quiet in groups, someone who observes more than you speak, someone who feels invisible next to the loud, dominating personalities, I need you to understand that your quietness is not a weakness. It might actually be a sign of security, of not needing to prove anything, of being comfortable enough in yourself that you don't need constant external validation. And the people who truly matter, the people who are worth connecting with, they'll see you, they'll value your contributions, they'll appreciate the thoughtfulness you bring instead of needing you to perform. Here's something about change that nobody tells you. When you decide to heal, when you commit to breaking your patterns and becoming different, there's going to be a period where you feel like you're getting worse, not better. You're going to be more aware of your dysfunction, more conscious of your mistakes, more uncomfortable in your own skin than you were when you were just unconsciously repeating the same cycles. This is because awareness precedes change, and awareness is painful. You can't unsee what you've seen. You can't unfeel what you've felt. And once you start recognizing your patterns, you notice them everywhere, and it feels overwhelming. You'll catch yourself people-pleasing and feel disgusted with yourself. You'll notice yourself falling into old relationship dynamics and want to scream. You'll see how much you've been hurting yourself and wonder how you ever functioned this way. And in those moments, it's easy to think that you're failing, that healing isn't working, that maybe you were better off before you started this whole journey. But here's the truth. That discomfort, that heightened awareness, that's actually growth. That's your consciousness expanding. That's you waking up to patterns that were running on autopilot for years. And yes, it feels worse before it feels better. But you're not going backwards. You're just finally seeing what's always been there. And once you can see it, you can change it. But if you give up during this uncomfortable phase, if you decide it's too hard and retreat back into unconsciousness, you'll stay stuck forever. You have to push through the awareness stage, through the discomfort of seeing yourself clearly, to get to the other side where you're actually living differently. There's a question you can ask yourself that will reveal so much about your emotional patterns, and it's this. When something good happens to you, when you have a success or a win or a moment of joy, what's your first instinct? Is it to share it, to celebrate it, to let yourself feel the fullness of the happiness? Or is it to minimize it, to find the catch, to immediately think of all the ways it might go wrong or why it doesn't really count? Because if you can't let yourself feel good when good things happen, if you're constantly bracing for the other shoe to drop, if you can't trust that joy is allowed to exist without being immediately followed by pain, that's not realism, that's trauma. That's a nervous system that learned early on that safety and happiness are temporary, that good things always come with a cost, that letting your guard down means getting hurt. And until you recognize this pattern, until you actively work to rewire your relationship with positive experiences, you'll keep sabotaging your own happiness. You'll keep finding reasons why the good things aren't real or don't count. And you'll live your entire life waiting for disaster, instead of actually living. You deserve to feel joy without fear, to celebrate wins without immediately looking for the downside, to trust that good things can just be good. But getting there requires conscious work, requires catching yourself in the pattern and choosing differently over and over until your nervous system learns that it's safe to be happy. Now let's talk about the way people use humor, because this is something that flies under the radar but says everything about someone's emotional state. When someone makes themselves the punchline constantly, when they use self-deprecating humor as their primary mode of communication, when every story they tell positions them as the fool or the failure or the disaster, they're not just being funny, they're managing their shame. They're beating you to the punch, making fun of themselves before you can, controlling the narrative of their inadequacy so it feels less painful than if someone else pointed it out. And in small doses, self-deprecating humor can be endearing, relatable, a way of not taking yourself too seriously. But when it's constant, when someone can't talk about themselves without turning it into a joke about how much they suck, that's not humility. That's deep-seated self-hatred. And if you love someone who does this, if you care about someone who can't seem to say anything positive about themselves without immediately undercutting it with humor, the kindest thing you can do is not laugh. Don't reward the self-deprecation. Don't reinforce the pattern. Don't make them feel like their worth is tied to how well they can mock themselves. Instead, gently push back. Point out the good things about them. Refuse to participate in the narrative that they're less than. Because every time you laugh at their self-deprecating joke, you're confirming their worst belief about themselves, and they need someone to see them differently than they see themselves. Here's something about forgiveness that most people completely misunderstand. Forgiveness is not about the other person. It's not about letting them off the hook, or saying what they did was okay, or opening yourself back up to being hurt again. Forgiveness is about you, about releasing the energetic hold that resentment has on your body, about choosing not to carry the weight of someone else's actions for the rest of your life. You can forgive someone and never speak to them again. You can forgive someone and still hold them accountable. You can forgive someone and maintain every boundary you need to stay safe. Forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. It doesn't mean trust. It doesn't mean going back to how things were. It means you're choosing to stop letting what they did define your present moment, to stop replaying the hurt, to stop giving them power over your emotional state. And sometimes forgiveness isn't even about them at all. Sometimes it's about forgiving yourself for staying too long, for ignoring red flags, for giving more than you should have. Sometimes the person you most need to forgive is you. And that's the hardest forgiveness of all, because we hold ourselves to impossible standards, because we judge our past selves with our present knowledge, because we can't seem to extend to ourselves the compassion we'd give to anyone else in the same situation. Let me tell you about a pattern that shows up in high-achieving people, in perfectionists, in anyone who's built their identity around being capable and strong and never needing help. There's a specific kind of loneliness that comes from being the person everyone relies on but having no one to rely on yourself. from being the problem solver but never being allowed to have problems, from being strong for everyone else but collapsing in private. And the cruel part is, you might have people who love you, people who would help if you asked, but you've spent so long performing strength, so long being the capable one, that you don't even know how to ask anymore. You don't know how to say, "I'm not okay," because your entire identity is built on being okay, on being the one who handles things, on never being a burden. So you keep going, you keep pushing, you keep showing up for everyone else while slowly dying inside, and nobody knows because you've gotten so good at hiding it. And here's what you need to hear. Your worth is not tied to your usefulness. Your lovability is not conditional on your ability to handle everything alone. And asking for help is not weakness, it's humanity. You don't have to earn the right to struggle. You don't have to prove you're worthy of support by first being strong enough for everyone else. You're allowed to fall apart. You're allowed to not have the answers. You're allowed to be the one who needs someone for once. And if the people in your life can't hold space for that, if they can't handle you being anything other than strong, then they were never loving you. They were just using you. There's something about the way we talk to ourselves that most people don't even notice, and it's this. The voice in your head, the one that criticizes you, that tells you you're not good enough, that points out every flaw and mistake, that's not your voice. It's the voice of every person who ever made you feel small, every critical parent or teacher or bully, every message you absorbed about who you had to be acceptable. And at some point, you internalized that voice, made it your own, and now it runs on autopilot, constantly judging you, constantly finding you lacking. But here's the thing. You can change that voice. You can choose what you say to yourself. You can decide to speak to yourself with the same kindness and compassion you'd show to someone you love. And I know that sounds simple, maybe even trite, but it's revolutionary. Because the relationship you have with yourself, the way you talk to yourself in your own head, affects everything. Every choice you make, every relationship you enter, every risk you take or don't take. If your internal voice is constantly tearing you down, you're never going to feel safe enough to grow, to try, to be vulnerable. But if you can learn to speak to yourself with gentleness, to catch the critical voice and replace it with something kinder, you'll be amazed at how much lighter life feels, how much more possible things seem. It's not about toxic positivity. It's not about pretending everything is perfect. It's about treating yourself like you matter, like you deserve your own compassion. And here's the final thing I want to leave you with, the thing that ties all of this together. Every single thing we've talked about, every pattern, every behavior, every psychological truth, all of it comes back to one core idea. You are not broken, you are adapted. Everything you do, every way you protect yourself, every pattern you've developed, it made sense at some point. It was a survival mechanism, a way of getting through something hard, a strategy that worked when you had limited options. And maybe those strategies don't serve you anymore. Maybe they're hurting you more than helping you now, but they're not evidence that you're defective. They're evidence that you did what you had to do to survive. And now, you get to choose something different. You get to see the patterns, understand where they came from, and decide if you want to keep them or let them go. You get to be compassionate with yourself for doing the best you could with what you knew, and you get to do better now that you know more. That's what all of this is about. Not judging yourself for being human, not hating yourself for having wounds, but seeing yourself clearly, understanding why you are the way you are, and choosing, consciously and deliberately, who you want to become. Because you're not stuck. You're not doomed to repeat the past forever. You're not beyond healing. You're just human. Beautifully, messily, perfectly human. And that means you have the capacity to change, to grow, to become someone you never thought you could be. And that journey, that messy, painful, incredible journey of becoming yourself, that's what life is really about.